Matt woke up feeling strangely queasy. Usually, morning tummy trouble is a symptom of his having drunk too much the night before. He had polished off that bottle of wine last night, but still, it hadn't added up to more than 3 glasses worth. He shouldn't be hungover. Coffee, he decided, was the solution, as it was to many of life's problems. He dragged himself into the kitchen and put on a pot to brew. Though the thought of eating was unpleasant, he dropped a slice of whole wheat bread into the toaster in case his stomach's emptiness was the cause of his unrest. Once the brewing and toasting were complete, he sat down at the kitchen table. 1 sip of coffee and 1 bite of toast later, his stomach roiled violently. Without even having made a conscious decision to move, he found himself leaning over the kitchen sink, retching up not only the toast and coffee, but seemingly everything else he had consumed over the past few days. He rinsed out the sink, wet a paper towel, and used it to dab his sweaty forehead. His body couldn't have chosen a worse time to get sick. He couldn't miss work. He had to fix the game. He would fix it by lunchtime, he decided. Then he could take the rest of the day off to rest and recover. It was almost noon, and Matt's stomach was still roiling like a storm at sea. He had moved to the wastebasket next to his desk so he could hurl into it as needed. Eating lunch was unimaginable. He had been working non-stop to repair the game with no success. He had consulted every manual he owned. He had read extensively from a variety of specialized sites on the internet. He had even put in a phone call to one of his old professors from grad school, but it was all to no avail. Matt wasn't used to feeling stupid or like a failure, but now he was experiencing both of these unpleasant, unaccustomed feelings. It was like Springtrap, his own creation, had bested him. There was a knock on his office door. "Come in," Matt said. He hoped it was either someone to save him or someone to put him out of his misery. "Hiya, Matt." It was neither. It was Gary, the head of his department, who was guaranteed in any given situation to A, be of no help whatsoever, and B, deepen his misery. Matt gritted his teeth. "Hey, Gary." Matt hoped the signs of his distress weren't visible, but he was pretty sure they were. He was breathing heavily and sweating like he'd just run a marathon. The intensity of his nausea made it difficult to speak. He was afraid that if he opened his mouth, something other than words would come out. Gary sat down in the chair across from Matt's desk. He was, as always, impeccably groomed, his hair in a perfect Ken doll part, his expensive suit wrinkle-free. "Have you been on social media the past couple of days?" he grinned, flashing his perfectly straight white teeth. "Kids are going nuts over this game. Some adults too. It's going to be huge, Matt. Huge. Huge," Matt echoed, trying to smile but failing. His mouth refused to go up at the corners. "So, how's it going?" Gary asked, leaning forward in his chair. Is everything moving forward like it needs to? Because I tell you, that deadline is looming." Matt didn't need to be told that the deadline was looming. "It's going great," he said, hoping he sounded more convincing than he felt. "Good to hear," Gary said, like he was trying to decide whether he believed him. Anything I can help you with?" "No, it's going great," Matt repeated, his voice getting a little high-pitched and whiny the way it did when he was nervous. "Excellent," Gary said, getting up from the chair. "Can't wait to see what you've put together. You'll be ready to present it on Friday night, right?" "Friday. You bet," Matt said, gulping. Gary left, closing the door behind him. Matt put his head down on a desk in despair. He had started the morning feeling confident in his ability to solve the problem, but the skies had darkened. Matt took his lunch break, not to eat, but just to get out of the office and try to clear his head. He watched the half block to Gus's, a dimly lit dive bar. Did I say watched? He walked the half block to Gus's, a dimly lit dive bar that reminded him of the cheap places he used to frequent in college. Maybe he would just sip on a soda to settle his stomach. Also, Gus's wouldn't be crowded at lunchtime, and maybe the combination of a soda and the dark and the quiet would help him think. Matt placed his order, and Gus filled it. Matt wished that all relationships could be that simple. He sipped his cola and thought, okay, so there was no time for a major redesign, but was there anything else he could do that might save the game and save his job? Matt looked around the room. In the corner there were a couple of old video game cabinets that had probably been there since the games were new in the 80s. He stared at the demo screen of an old maze game, watching a weird yellow ball guy being pursued by candy-coloured ghosts. Then the thought hit him. I can just program in a new Springtrap, one that follows the path it's supposed to. The old program is so messed up it won't have any impact on the game anyway. No one will even know it's there. Why hadn't he thought of this before? The problem was as good as solved. He ate a handful of bar peanuts and finished his soda. Something about the combination of saltiness and fizziness soothed his stomach. Then he went back to the office to build a new Springtrap, one that followed the path it was supposed to follow, and this time Matt wouldn't antagonize the rabbit. He had learned his lesson. It hadn't been easy hacking into the company's computer, but Gene had to do it. Maybe it was a sign that things were looking up. Life hadn't been doing great for him lately. He had gotten fired from his job on the nerd team at Good Deal Electronics store, and had had to move back in with his parents until he could find something else, which hadn't happened yet. It was depressing being a grown man living in your childhood bedroom, looking at all of those trophies from Scholars Bowl, oh my god, I'm so terrible at reading, and math team, and realising how little they meant. That was why he'd been packing on the weight. Depression and mum's home cooking were a dangerous combination. But now he at least had one thing going for him. He had his own early copy of Springtrap's Revenge. Oh no! Because of his superior hacking skills, he was going to be one of the first people, if not the very first person, to play the game. And with his superior gaming skills, he might very well become the very first person to beat the game too. And that would be an accomplishment. He put on the VR headset. He was ready to play. Oh no, okay. Gene created an avatar that looked like his ideal self, like he would look again once he got back on his feet. Getting into the computer system and getting this game was a good sign, Gene thought. A success. That would be the first in a series of successes. Once his avatar was created, Gene found himself standing at the end of a dark hallway. He walked to the opposite end. There was a door on the left and a door on the right. Randomly, he chose the one on the right. He found himself in a room with 4 doors. Clearly he had to choose which one. And from his past experience with FNAF games, he knew that the wrong choice would result in a jump scare and a game over screen, of course. He chose the door on the left. He took a deep breath, turned the knob and pulled. It was clear. He breathed a sigh of relief, took a few steps forward and found himself in another dark hallway. He walked forward until he slammed into a wall. He had to say the VR features were impressive. When his avatar hit the wall, he could feel the bump. He felt his way to the right, where there was a passage forward, and continued feeling his way along the wall. Between the limited perspective offered by the VR and the lack of light, this maze was obviously no joke. But if there was one area in his life where Gene had full confidence in himself, it was gaming. He was going to find his way out. It was strange. It seemed like part of the fun of negotiating the maze should be avoiding creepy characters who lurked around corners and jumped out when least expected. But so far there were no creepy characters in sight, not even the title character. The game was called Springtrap's Revenge, so where was Springtrap? Gene Jr., dinner's ready, a voice called from the kitchen, breaking Gene's immersion in the game. Stuffed peppers and macaroni and cheese. I'll be there in a minute, Ma, Gene yelled back. But he knew it would be longer than a minute. He wasn't leaving the game until he found Springtrap. Besides, if there was one thing he knew about Ma, it was that she wasn't going to let him go hungry. If he took too long to come to the table, she'd make him a plate and bring it to his room, so he could shovel in his dinner while he played. Gene saw something green sticking out from behind a corner of the maze. He went to investigate, steeling himself for a jump scare, but the version of Springtrap he found, while undoubtedly scary, was incapable of jumping out at anyone. Springtrap's body lay motionless and flat on its back, its abdomen flayed open. Springs and gears protruded from the wound. Its eyes were open and empty. Gene thought it might be a trick, that any second the green rabbit would spring to life and grab Gene's avatar ankle. But the rabbit just lay there. Gene made his avatar nudge it with his foot, but it was inert. It seemed to be game over for Springtrap. But that didn't make any sense. If this game was about Springtrap getting revenge, why would the supposed main character be dead in the beginning, unless the plot turned into some kind of ghost story? Gene Jr., your dinner's getting cold. I'll be there in a minute, Ma. Just let me finish filling out this job application, Gene called. He knew if she thought he was applying for a job, she'd stay off his back for a few more minutes. He had to figure out what was going on in Springtrap's revenge, and the only way to do it was to take a look at the code. It was time to put those superior hacking skills to use again. Oh no. After a few commands, he was in, but what he found made no sense. According to the code, Springtrap had been extracted from the very game that bore his name in the title. The program that initiated the extraction was inexplicably called 𝓑𝓮𝓬𝓸𝓶𝓮. Huh. Okay. I'm interested. Matt was hungry, ravenous. He was sitting at a table for two at Ye Olde Steakhouse. His companion at the table was Madison, who thankfully was as pretty as her pictures, with shiny chestnut hair and big doe-like brown eyes. This was their first date, but Matt was having a hard time focusing on the required chit-chat because he was so hungry. He realised he had scooted the bread basket in front of him and had been mindlessly gnawing his way through the rolls. "I'm sorry, would you like some bread?" he asked, forcing himself to push the basket in her direction. "No thanks," she said with an awkward grin. "I'm watching my carbs." "Not me, obviously," Matt said, trying for humour as he tore off another chunk of bread with his teeth. What was this? Roll number 4? Number 5? The server appeared, and before she could even ask them for their order, Matt said, "Porterhouse steak, very rare, with a loaded baked potato and creamed spinach on the side. And let's get a refill on this bread basket too." "And for you, ma'am?" The server turned to Madison. Matt figured this was a subtle jab at him, a reminder that he was supposed to have let the lady order first, but he was far too hungry to care about the etiquette. He was so hungry that it felt like a medical emergency. "The Cobb salad, please, with blue cheese dressing on the side," Madison said. Matt hoped the server would hurry back with that new bread basket before he started trying to eat the tablecloth. "You know, I've always wondered," he said. "You girls always order salads when you're out on dates, like you don't want a guy seeing you eat too much. When you go out with your girlfriends, do you order something else, like a big plate of ribs or something?" Ribs, Matt thought. Ribs sounds ridiculous. Madison smiled. "It depends on how hungry I am. Sometimes when I go out with my best friend, we split a burger and fries." "You split a burger and fries?" Matt said. "That's just like an appetizer or something." Madison giggled. "It's really not. Half a cheeseburger is plenty, and girls can't eat like you guys can. If I look at a piece of cheesecake, I gain 5 pounds. Oh my god, same. Same. Even though I'm a skinny boy. Cheesecake. For dessert, Matt definitely wanted cheesecake. Yeah, good choice, good choice. White chocolate cheesecake, raspberries on top, yes. He rarely ordered dessert, but he was going for it tonight. "Stop," he told himself. "Stop obsessing over food and notice your date." "Well," he said finally, "whatever you're doing, you should keep on doing it because you look fantastic." "Thanks," she said, smiling. Good, Matt thought. When in doubt, give a compliment. It always smooths things over. When the food arrived, Matt felt like a starving lumberjack. The rare steak sat in an appetizing pool of blood, and when Matt cut into it, the meat was a purpley red. "I think I just heard it moo," Madison said as Matt held a dripping chunk of meat to his lips. "Well, you won't hear it long because it's going to be in my belly." "Oh god," Matt said. The nearly raw meat was delicious, so intensely so that Matt closed his eyes as he chewed. He ignored the vegetables on his plate and sawed into the meat over and over again, cutting off big chunks that filled his cheeks as he chewed. He resented how the knife and fork slowed down his eating. Really, it would make much more sense just to pick up the meat and rend off chunks with his canines. That's what they're for, weren't they? Table manners, all the rules of etiquette, really, were just ways to delay the body getting what it needed, and Matt's body needed this meat. He wasn't quite sure when he had picked up the large T-bone from the centre of the steak and started gnawing it, growling to himself with animal pleasure. But then he felt Madison's eyes on him. She was sitting across from him, holding a fork full of lettuce in midair, staring at him like he was an exhibit in a zoo. Then he felt the eyes of the other customers at the other tables as well. He set down the bone. "I went to the doctor the other day," he lied. "He said I was terribly anemic. I must have needed this red meat something fierce." "What is happening? What?" You must have," Madison said. She reached into her handbag, pulled out her phone, and looked at it for a second. "Oh no," she said. "I just got a text from my roommate. My cat is sick. I have to go." She lies. She lied. Thanks for dinner. She didn't stick around long enough to hear Matt say, "I'll call you." Why couldn't he satisfy this bottomless hunger? His steak was gone now, and so were the baked potato and cream spinach. He reached across the table for the rest of Madison's mostly uneaten salad. It would be a shame for it to go to waste. Oh god. Why is the story so comedic? Okay. As Matt got undressed for his bedtime shower, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the bathroom mirror and almost didn't recognize himself. His belly was definitely bigger. He was bloated from the enormous dinner he had eaten at the steakhouse, but this seemed like more than the standard post-meal bloat. Matt looked at his handsome face and shrugged. What were a few more pounds? He was still looking good, and historically, being a man with a little extra weight was a sign of prosperity. Matt woke up with a goal that was crystal clear in its simplicity: to make it to the bathroom before it was too late. He threw off the covers and ran, then spewed the remains of his last night's huge and expensive dinner into the porcelain bowl. Oh my god. Ew. He retched and gagged long after there was nothing left to bring up. Strangely, thanks for all that information by the way, Scott. Strangely, he still felt bloated afterward, and his belly was still distended. Was this some kind of weird virus, the symptoms of which were cycles of extreme nausea followed by extreme hunger? If it was a virus, it was certainly hanging on a long time. He would have to ask people at work if they had heard of anybody else having the same symptoms. "Matt, are you feeling okay?" Jamie asked as they sat in the conference room waiting for a meeting to start. Her brow was knitted in a look of concern, but Matt doubted that it was genuine. "Oh, it's just this bug I'm having a hard time fighting off," Matt said. The smell of the coffee in the room, usually one of his favourite aromas, was nauseating. "I'm either nauseated or starving, and I'm bloated and gassy. Do you know about any viruses with those symptoms going around?" "I don't," Jamie said. "And I know about all the bugs because I have kids in school who bring them home," she smiled. "Seriously though, maybe you should have a doctor check you out. You're definitely bloated, and your colour doesn't look good. You're kind of yellowish, like you might have jaundice. Maybe you should get some blood work done and get your liver function checked just to be on the safe side." "Oh, doctors don't know anything," Matt said, and neither did Jamie. He didn't even know why he had bothered to ask her anything. Gary walked in, which had the negative effect of starting the meeting, but the positive effect of ending any other conversation. "Good morning," Gary said, taking his place at the head of the conference table. "Well, the release date is in 2 weeks, and the reviews from early screening copies of the game are in. And the results are..." He looked down at his notes. "Mixed." Jamie let out a sigh. "According to reviewers," Gary said, "the storyline is good, the gameplay is challenging, and the number of jump scares is consistent with what FNAF fans expect." He cleared his throat. "However, every single reviewer agreed on one fact. The AI design of Springtrap is sloppy and not up to the game's usual standards." Gary didn't call out Matt by name, but he might as well have. With Springtrap's bizarre series of regenerations and deaths after Matt had left him to wander the maze, Matt had really needed to rush to create a new AI to plug into the game, but he had been confident that despite the last-minute nature of the work, he had still done a good job. Well, good enough anyway. "Oh, is that what reviewers are saying?" Matt said. His face heated up with anger. "Are you going to tell me who those people are, or are they really just you?" Hey, Gary said, holding his hands up as if defending himself. "No need to get all riled up. I'm just saying that in this competitive climate, nobody can afford to be doing anything but their best work." "I always do my best work," Matt said, raising his voice. "In fact, I would be doing some of it right now if I weren't wasting my time in this pointless meeting." Jamie reached out to touch Matt's arm, but he jerked it away. "I know these meetings take away time that you would use to work and think," Gary said, "and I promise this one won't last long. But after the meeting, Matt, as you were working and thinking, I would suggest that one of the things you should think about is the appropriate way to talk to your supervisor." That really wasn't needed, was it? Let me just have a sip of water, or my throat will go so dry I'm not able to speak. Matt drove home in a rage. He broke the speed limit by double digits and powered through red lights. Let a cop pull me over, he thought. Just let him. Both anger and hunger were gnawing at him, even though he was so bloated and gassy that it felt like a pinprick to his stomach would cause it to pop like a balloon. When he drove by a burger joint, the smell of hot grease lured him to turn in. He went through the drive-thru and ordered a double bacon cheeseburger, large fries, and a chocolate shake. Food that he would generally dismiss as too unhealthy for human consumption. Not wanting to slow down his eating because he was also driving, he pulled into a parking space and devoured the greasy meat and carbs like a ravenous wolverine. His hunger subsided some. His anger did not. When he got to the apartment, Jason was packing video games from his shelf into a cardboard box. Other filled boxes were scattered across the floor. "What's going on?" Matt asked, though he had a feeling he knew. "Listen, man," Jason said, not looking up at him. "Megan finally told me what you did. She said she almost didn't because we're roommates, but then she decided that I needed to know. She said you hit on her when you were supposed to be getting to know Eva. You gave her your number when you knew she was on a date with me. Not cool, man." "Okay," Matt said. "If you want me to apologize, I'll apologize." He didn't see the need for an apology, though. He hadn't been trying to forcibly take Megan away from Jason. He had just been presenting her with choices. Jason shook his head. "See, that's just it. I don't want you to apologize. I want you to stop being a jerk. But unfortunately, I don't see that ever happening. So I'm moving out. You spent our whole meal the other night talking about how prosperous and successful you are, right before you left us with the bill. You don't need my help with the rent. You can afford this place without me." "I can," Matt said, "but I want you to stay." He didn't know why, but he had a sudden desperate need not to be alone. It was a vague but persistent feeling that if he were left alone, something bad would happen. Yeah, and Eva wanted you to be nice to her, but she didn't get that wish either. She's a super nice person, Matt. She deserved better. Yeah, you fixed me up with a girl with the great personality, Matt said, laughing bitterly. You kept the pretty one for yourself. Jason threw up his hands. "Okay, look. I can't have this conversation right now. I'm leaving. Tonight, I'm borrowing a truck from a buddy. I'll come back in the morning and get my stuff when you're at work. I think it's best if you and I stay out of each other's way for a while." Jason grabbed his keys and was out the door. Matt got a beer from the fridge and sat down on the couch. How had things gotten so bad so fast? He didn't really need to ask. He knew the answer. It was the rabbit. He couldn't explain it, but somehow the rabbit was to blame. The beer tasted sour and unpleasant, and Matt felt the sickly blooming of a headache above his right temple. He reached up to massage his head and felt a hard knob pushing against his scalp. Was it possible he had gotten hit in the head hard enough for a knot to form and didn't remember it? And if he didn't remember it, what did that mean? That he had some kind of brain injury that was causing him to lose his mind? Or maybe it was his physical health, not his mental health, he should be worried about. Matt needed someone to talk to about his problems, but there was no one. Hannah had abandoned him, a string of ungrateful girlfriends had abandoned him, and now Jason, his best friend, had abandoned him. As if that weren't all bad enough, he was unappreciated and criticized at work. Perhaps such loneliness was a sad price to pay for his brilliance. Like so many geniuses before him, he was isolated and misunderstood. For the first time in his adult life, Matt found himself crying real tears. Matt couldn't fasten his pants. Today they had been a tight fit, but still a fit. Yesterday it was a tight fit, but today they were impossible. Today he had lounged around in pyjama pants all day, but now trying to fit into real pants, it was apparent that his belly had swollen such that his size 34 waistline was only a fond memory. He tried another, more forgiving pair, and then another, all to no avail. The discarded pants lay strewn on his bed. The problem was that he had a date in a few minutes, of course, and while he did find most rules of etiquette to be stupid and oppressive, he did accept the fact that a public date generally required one to wear pants. He dug through his closet and found a size 36 in the very back. He stepped into them, but they still wouldn't fasten over his belly. Finally, he pulled them down below the mountainous swelling and managed to zip them back up. The buttons still wouldn't close, but he managed to secure them with a belt. It wasn't the ideal situation, but it would have to do. Matt had arranged to meet his new date, another internet acquaintance, in a bar. This way, he reasoned, if the date turned out to be as disastrous as disastrous as his last ones, at least he wouldn't have to pay for dinner. The bar was one of those sleek modern places favoured by young urban professionals, all chrome and glass and indirect lighting. Walking in, he caught his reflection in one of the place's many mirrors and was momentarily startled. His belly was so bloated that the buttons of his shirt were straining, the gaps between the buttons revealing the yellowish skin. His face and hair were drenched in sweat, and was it his imagination, or was his hair also getting thinner? Still, Matt knew he had a lot more going for him than any of the losers in this bar. Emma. That was the new girl's name, right? Emma was lucky to be going out with him. He didn't recognize her at first. She was sitting at a table alone and gave him a little wave. Her face was pretty like he remembered it being on the dating site, and so was her honey blonde hair. But the picture she used on the site must have been taken a good 25 pounds ago. The girl was chunky. It was a good thing he hadn't committed to taking her out to dinner. He probably couldn't afford to feed her. Well, it was too late to slip out now. She had already spotted him. He passed it on a smile and walked up to the table. Emma? Matt! She smiled broadly and gestured for him to sit down. So, what are we drinking? Apple teeny? One fruity girl drink coming up. Let me go converse with the barkeep. He went to the bar and ordered the girl drink for Emma and a martini for himself. It was strong, but he had a feeling he was going to need it to get through this date. Yum, thank you, Emma said when he set down the toxic-looking green drink in front of her. Thanks for picking out this place. It's really cool. I'm ashamed to admit I don't get out much. Most nights after work I just put on my pyjamas and watch Netflix. And eat a gallon of ice cream, Matt thought. But he just smiled and nodded. Yeah, sometimes I just end up hanging out with my roommate and playing video games, Matt said. Then he remembered Jason wasn't his roommate anymore. No need to tell her that, though. He had already decided he was never going to see her again. Well, you're a video game developer, she said, sipping a cocktail. So when you hang out and play video games, that's like research, right? He managed a strained smile. Something was happening in his abdomen. Pressure was building in an unpleasant way, almost like a force was pushing his belly from the inside. He took a sip of his martini, which hit his stomach like battery acid. He must have grimaced because Emma asked, "Are you okay?" Sure, he said, but he wasn't. But he felt like he was going to burst like an overripe berry. He couldn't sit here and make a polite chit-chat. But let me just go ahead and tell you right now that this isn't going to work out, so you enjoy your drink and I'm just going to say goodnight. Now wait a second, Emma said. You've barely even talked to me. It's way too soon to figure out whether you think I'm an interesting person or not. So tell me, how do you know this isn't going to work out? Was she going to force him to say it? Apparently she was. Okay, Emma, I'm sure you have a great personality, but when you post a picture of yourself on a dating site, it needs to look like you, not you 25 pounds ago. Emma's mouth dropped open. I can't believe you have the nerve to say that to me. First of all, it's shallow and offensive, but second of all, have you looked in the mirror lately? Feel free. They're everywhere in this place. Your picture online is at least 35 pounds ago. Did I notice that when you came in? Sure, but it didn't bother me. What does bother me is that you're a gigantic hypocrite. Fine. Well, I think the one thing we can mutually agree on is that this date is over. Matt stood up. And when he did, he heard an odd pop 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 sound as though someone were making popcorn. Then he felt a cool breeze over his torso. Looking down, he realized that his bloated belly had caused all the buttons of his shirt to pop off, and now he was exposed for the general public to see. Emma laughed. She laughed so hard she snorted. She laughed until her eyes watered. I can't believe it, she said between giggles. This is the best bad date ever. Wait till I tell my girlfriends. Matt tried to clutch his shirt closed and fled the premises. As soon as he hit the sidewalk, the pressure from his belly snapped his belt buckle, and he had to hold up his pants with the other hands to keep them from falling down. He relinquished his grip on his shirt long enough to get into his car. He just needed to get home so this terrible night would be over. Wow. He is terrible at dating. Has Scott ever been on a date before? Sorry. Back at his apartment, Matt changed into a baggy t-shirt and a pair of elastic-waisted pyjama pants. Tomorrow he would have to go shopping for new clothes. But what could he wear while he shopped? Was he going to turn into one of those tacky people who wore pyjamas in public? The pressure in his stomach was getting worse, and the weird knot on his head was hurting where it was stretching the skin of his scalp. Maybe he had some medicine that might help him. He went to the kitchen, chewed up a couple of antacid tablets, and drank a glass of water. He waited for relief, but it didn't come. Instead, the pressure increased. Even the soft t-shirt he was wearing felt irritating. He took it off and looked down at his watermelon-shaped belly. The pressure from inside was pounding, pummeling. He looked at the skin of his belly. There was movement underneath. When he felt the pounding, a faint imprint of an indeterminate shape showed up on his skin. Matt stifled a scream as he realized the truth. Something was inside him, and it was trying to get out. The painful pounding became more insistent, a drumbeat of agony. Oh, agony. If it was out of him, whatever it was, the pain would stop. Get it out, he thought as he squeezed his eyes shut and clenched his jaw. He grabbed his discarded t-shirt and bit down on the fabric, just to have some kind of outlet for the pain. If he got it out, the pain would stop. But how? There was no place for it to go. Another surge of pain hit him, this one crushing. He doubled over and grabbed the kitchen counter for support. His gaze turned to the kitchen knives hanging on a magnetic strip on the wall. He could cut it out. Cutting would relieve the pressure and get whatever was out. He would be free of whatever this burden was. He wanted to be free. Oh no. Oh god, okay. This is going in a weird direction. He grabbed the largest, sharpest kitchen knife and lay on his back on the floor. Starting the incision was the hardest part, but the pain inside him was greater than any pain he could cause himself. Oh my god, I feel faint just thinking about this. He sank the knife's tip into the top of his abdomen and then drew the blade downward, biting down on the t-shirt so the neighbors wouldn't hear him scream. There was pain, but there was also relief. The pressure stopped, the blood flowed, and Matt saw, emerging from the incision, one long green rabbit ear. What? What is going on? Excuse me? Okay, that came out of nowhere. This is weird. This is so weird. What? I mean, I'm going to continue reading in a second, but let me just firstly have a sip of water. And also, this is a weird... I did not expect this. I did not expect this. Okay. Well... Right. The whole rabbit... yeah, I am there. The whole rabbit emerged, wet and slimy with mucus. A perfectly formed springtrap the size of a healthy newborn infant. But unlike a newborn infant, the rabbit could pull itself out of the incision, land in a kneeling position on the kitchen floor, and then rise to stand. The blood loss was making Matt fade in and out of consciousness, but even in his adult state, he could see that the creature had just spawned. He had spawned with Springtrap, but somehow not Springtrap. This one was realer, more organic than the one in the video game. Matt's mind drifted back to a story his mum had read to him when he was little about a stuffed toy rabbit that he had wished so hard to be real that it became real. The Springtrap that stood over Matt's bleeding body was not an amalgamation of code that somebody like him had programmed into a computer. The Springtrap was real. The green rabbit sat down on the floor beside Matt and rested Matt's head in its furry lap. In its furry lap. It felt nice. Matt was losing so much blood. Could a person lose this much blood and still stay alive? The rabbit stroked Matt's cheek. Oh my god! Matt didn't know if he heard the word come out of the rabbit's mouth or if it was only in his own head. Daddy! Oh my god! Oh. This story is the funniest, one of the best, and also the worst. Oh my god! What is happening? I felt faint from the incision part. That was gruesome. I imagined it. It's so well explained, but I felt so faint from it. Yeah, that is wow. This is taking an unexpected turn. What is going on?